The Graveyard Spirit. My name is Daniel, and what I'm about to tell you is not a story I read somewhere, nor is it a tale someone else told me. It is something I myself witnessed when I was a child, an experience that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. Back then, we lived in a small, old house. From the front door of our home, you could see an ancient graveyard stretching into the distance. Rows of crooked headstones, some broken, some half buried in the soil, stood silently like watchers of the night. During the day, it looked eerie but manageable. But after sunset, the atmosphere changed completely. The air around the graveyard would grow unnaturally still. The calls of owls echoed through the darkness, and sometimes, stray dogs barked at shadows that no one else could see. As a child, I often stared at that graveyard from our window. The moonlight would fall across the graves, and the old, twisted trees would cast long, crooked shadows that seemed to move on their own. I was too young to fully understand fear, yet something deep inside me always told me there was more to that place than just earth and stone. Still, despite all the creepy stories people whispered about graveyards, nothing paranormal had ever happened to us, not until the night that changed everything. It was the kind of night that begins like any other, quiet, ordinary, uneventful. Little did I know that by the time it ended, my childhood innocence would be gone forever, replaced by a memory that never escaped. There was a man who worked in our house. His name was Robert, though out of respect and affection, I always called him Uncle Robert. He was not related to us by blood, but to me, he felt like family. He was a kind man, quiet in nature, and he had been helping our family for many years. Uncle Robert's house stood across the graveyard, right at the edge of the forest. Every day, he had to walk through that sea of graves to reach our home. Most people in the neighborhood avoided that path, especially after sunset. But Uncle Robert was different. He would walk across the graveyard as if it were nothing more than a simple field. Sometimes, I would tease him, saying, "Uncle, aren't you scared of passing through the graveyard at night?" He would chuckle softly, shake his head, and reply, "Fear is only for those who believe in it. The dead cannot harm the living." His words always impressed me. As a child, I thought of him as fearless, almost brave, like the characters from the stories my grandmother used to tell me. He never showed a trace of worry, not even when others claimed they had seen strange lights flickering among the graves or heard whispers in the wind. For us, Uncle Robert was more than just a worker. He would often bring small gifts for me, and sometimes tell me stories while we sat in the courtyard. My parents trusted him deeply. To them, he was not just a helping hand, he was a man they could rely on, someone who stood with us in times of need. And yet, that sense of comfort, that familiarity we had with him, would be shattered on one terrifying evening. An evening that proved that even the bravest man can fall prey to forces beyond human understanding. It was an ordinary evening, just like countless others before it. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky stained in deep shades of red and purple. The graveyard outside our house had already begun to disappear into darkness, the crooked tombstones casting longer and darker shadows under the fading light. That was when Uncle Robert arrived. The moment I saw him step into our courtyard, I felt something unusual. Something in my chest heightened, though I couldn't explain why. He looked different. His face was pale, almost drained of life, and his eyes were not the same. They were darker than usual, sunken, and glimmering with a strange, unsettling intensity. Even the way he walked seemed unnatural, as if every movement was stiff and forced, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. My mother noticed it too. Concern spread across her face, and she quickly asked, "Robert, are you all right? You don't look well." But instead of answering her question, Uncle Robert sat down heavily in the chair by the door, staring at nothing in particular. For a few moments, he remained silent, and then, in a voice that sounded strangely hollow, he said, "I'm hungry, very hungry." Those words didn't sound like him. They were spoken too slowly, too deeply, as though something else had borrowed his mouth to speak. My mother hesitated. She thought perhaps he was ill. Maybe he hadn't eaten all day. So, trying to be kind, she said, "Wait here, I'll bring you some food." She guided him to the dining table and hurried into the kitchen. But as she walked away, I couldn't take my eyes off him. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't the Uncle Robert I knew. His hands tapped the wooden table rhythmically, almost impatiently. His breathing was heavy, louder than normal, filling the quiet room with an uneasy sound. I wanted to speak to him, but the words stuck in my throat. It was just the beginning. None of us knew then that what we were about to witness that night would forever change how we looked at Uncle Robert and the graveyard beside our home. When my mother returned from the kitchen carrying a plate of food, she froze at the doorway. Her face turned pale, her hands trembling so violently that the plate nearly slipped from her grip. Uncle Robert was already eating, no, not eating, devouring the fruits on the table. But what horrified us wasn't the fact that he was hungry. It was how he was eating. He was biting into whole oranges with the peel still on, tearing through them with his teeth as if the bitter skin didn't exist. Juice dripped down his chin, mixing with the strange foam that had begun to gather at the corners of his mouth. He chewed and swallowed with such ferocity that it looked less like eating and more like an animal tearing into its prey. Then his eyes lifted, and for the first time that evening I saw them clearly. They weren't Uncle Robert's eyes anymore. They were wild, burning with a sickly yellow gleam, darting around the room as though searching for something or someone. My mother whispered under her breath, "Oh God." She stepped back, fear spreading across her face. At that exact moment, my father came home. He pushed open the main door, humming softly, but the tune stopped dead in his throat the second he saw what was happening at the dining table. My father's expression hardened, but my mother quickly motioned to him with her eyes, silently begging him not to say anything. She was terrified that any wrong move could make things worse. "Robert," my father said cautiously, "you should rest. You don't look well. Maybe you should go home for the night." Uncle Robert stopped chewing. Slowly, he lifted his head and stared at my father. The room grew unbearably silent. Then, in that same hollow, unnatural voice, he muttered, "I am not going home until I am done." The way he said those words made my skin crawl. His tone wasn't just threatening, it was final, as if some invisible force had already decided what would happen next. And then, without warning, he slammed his fist against the wooden table so hard that the plates rattled. My mother dropped the food she had been holding, and I instinctively stepped back, pressing myself against the wall. It was no longer Uncle Robert sitting at that table. It was something else, something that had followed him from the graveyard. For a long moment, the room felt like it was holding its breath. None of us moved. None of us dared to. The only sound was the sickening crunch of Uncle Robert grinding the last pieces of fruit between his teeth. Then, suddenly, he rose from the chair. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by an unseen hand. He walked toward the door, muttering to himself in a language none of us could understand. My mother gripped my arm tightly, as though to keep me from being swept away by whatever force was in the room. At the threshold, Uncle Robert paused. He tilted his head unnaturally to one side, the bones in his neck cracking loudly in the silence. Then he turned, fixing his burning, hollow eyes directly on my father. "You," he rasped, "you must guide me." My father frowned. "Guide you where?" he asked cautiously. "To the end," Uncle Robert whispered, his voice hollow and inhuman. My mother shook her head violently, silently signaling my father not to agree, not to follow. My father, realizing something was terribly wrong, stepped back and said firmly, "I cannot." That single refusal seemed to ignite something monstrous inside Uncle Robert. His face twisted with rage, and his body trembled as if an invisible fire consumed him. Then before anyone could stop him, he grabbed a loose brick from the garden path and hurled it at our window with terrifying strength. The glass shattered instantly. Shards rained down onto the floor, glittering in the dim light like deadly fragments of ice. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and violent, as if announcing the arrival of something far darker than any of us could imagine. I screamed. My mother pulled me behind her, shielding me, while my father stepped forward, his fists clenched, trying to hold his ground. But Uncle Robert wasn't finished. He turned, his gaze wild and predatory, and began walking down the path toward his own house, muttering, growling, his voice layered with another deeper, darker, not his own. We watched from the broken window as he disappeared into the shadows of the trees. A chill swept through the night air, and even the leaves outside seemed to shiver. That was when the real horror began. By the time Uncle Robert reached his own house at the edge of the woods, the night had grown thick and oppressive. Shadows clung to the walls like living things, and the moon, hidden behind clouds, offered no light. He called out to his wife, his voice echoing through the darkness. "Come with me." Now, his wife hesitated. She stepped back, fear written all over her face. I cannot," she whispered. That was when the real horror began. Uncle Robert's body contorted unnaturally, his movements no longer human. His hands shot out, gripping her throat with a strength no mortal could possess. The air around them seemed to thicken, and a low, guttural sound emanated from his chest, an unnatural growl that chilled anyone who heard it. I was watching from a distance with my father and some neighbors who had rushed after the commotion. Several men tried to intervene, pulling at him, struggling with all their might, but it was like trying to hold back a storm. Uncle Robert, or the thing controlling him, was far too strong. Then, a huger arrived, summoned by desperate neighbors. Calm yet commanding, he began to recite prayers and blow on the possessed man. The effect was immediate. The unnatural growl softened, and a strange, hollow voice began to speak. "I am not Robert. I am a jinn, a spirit that dwells in the graveyard. I took his body because it was weak. I wanted to take his wife with me, to kill her, and I wanted his master to lead me, so I could kill him too. There is no reason, no purpose. I do this because I can." The huger raised his hand, speaking with authority. "If you do not leave this body now, I will imprison you in a bottle forever." The jinn trembled, fear flashing in its otherworldly eyes. It begged, promising that it would never harm another soul, that it would leave the house and the graveyard forever. The huger nodded, but he issued a warning. "Before you leave, you will restore everything you have broken." And with that, the monstrous presence began to withdraw from Uncle Robert's body. Slowly, painfully, his muscles relaxed, his unnatural strength drained away. The room grew eerily silent. After the huger's prayers and the jinn's departure, a heavy silence settled over the night. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, making it hard to breathe, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Uncle Robert lay on the ground, exhausted, his face pale and sweating. The unnatural fire that had possessed him was gone. The air around us felt lighter, though a shiver still ran down my spine. It was as if the house itself was slowly exhaling after a long, terrifying ordeal. Outside, something remarkable happened. A massive branch from the tree in front of our house, which had threatened to fall during the chaos, snapped and crashed to the ground. But when we stepped closer, the branch had moved slightly, and the shattered window, the one Uncle Robert had thrown a brick through, was now completely restored. The glass gleamed as though untouched, flawless and whole. We stepped inside the house cautiously. Everything seemed ordinary again. Chairs were in place, the dining table was clean, and the eerie sense of dread had vanished. The only sound was the wind rustling gently through the trees outside. From that night on, Uncle Robert never displayed any sign of the jinn again. He resumed his work as if nothing had happened, a normal man in a normal world. But for me, the memory stayed. Even years later, when I close my eyes at night, I can hear it, the sound of teeth crushing fruit, peel and all, echoing in the dark corners of my mind. It is a sound that reminds me, some forces cannot be reasoned with. Some horrors exist simply because they can. And the graveyard beside our home will always be a place where the living should tread lightly. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream, and we'll bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and hit that subscribe button, right here on The Horror Dream. Your support keeps us going, so stay with us. Subscribe to The Horror Dream for more spine-tingling tales.